Julian Lombardi had everything under control until one moment shattered his perfectly ordered life. What he saw that day left him speechless, but the truth behind it would change everything. Julian Lombardi moved through the grand corridors of his estate with the same mechanical decision that defined every aspect of his life. His days were meticulously scheduled, his business empire thrived under his control, and his home ran like a well-oiled machine. There was no room for surprises. That was why, as he passed by the wide glass windows overlooking the garden, what he saw made him stop in his tracks. His 12-year-old son, Leonardo, was dancing, but he wasn't alone. With him was Isabella, the house cook, a woman he had barely given a second thought to since she was hired 6 months ago. The sight was so unexpected that Julian had to blink several times, convinced that his mind was playing tricks on him. Yet there they were, moving across the grass in perfect synchrony. Leonardo's movements were hesitant, unsteady, yet filled with an unusual concentration. He stumbled more than once, but rather than displaying frustration, he laughed, a genuine, carefree laugh that Julian hadn't heard in years. Ever since his mother's passing, Leonardo had become reserved, locked in his own world. And now, there he was, smiling because of her. Isabella moved with an elegance that Julian had never associated with a cook. Every step, every motion was precise and deliberate. Not playful improvisation, but the execution of someone who had been trained in the art of movement. She wasn't just indulging a child's whim, she was guiding him, teaching him. A cold unease spread through Julian's chest. He didn't like that someone else, especially a mere employee, held such influence over his son. The longer he watched, the more his irritation grew. He had no patience for this. With a stiff posture, he made his way outside, his footsteps sharp against the stone path. As he approached, Isabella and Leonardo noticed him. The boy froze, his earlier joy vanishing into apprehension. Isabella, however, remained composed, merely wiping her hands on her apron before straightening to meet Julian's gaze. "What is going on here?" Julian's voice was cool, controlled. Leonardo lowered his head, but Isabella met his stare without hesitation. "We were practicing, senor," she said simply. "Practicing what exactly?" "Your son wanted to learn how to dance." Julian turned his attention to Leonardo. "Since when?" The boy hesitated, shuffling his feet. "For a while now," he admitted quietly. A sharp pang of guilt struck Julian's chest. He had never noticed. He had never asked. "And why didn't you tell me?" Leonardo lifted his shoulders in a small shrug, but before he could answer, Isabella spoke. "Because he had no one to practice with." Julian narrowed his eyes at her. There was something in her tone, something firm and unwavering. It irritated him. "This isn't your job," he stated. "No, it isn't," Isabella agreed. "Then why are you doing it?" She crossed her arms, her expression unreadable. "Because he asked me to." Julian turned back to his son. "Is that true?" Leonardo nodded. A heavy silence stretched between them. Julian exhaled slowly, irritation clawing at the edges of his composure. He had no logical reason to be this bothered, yet he was. Something about this entire situation felt off, like there was a layer to it he couldn't see, and that was unacceptable. His gaze shifted back to Isabella. "I need to speak with you." Alone. Leonardo looked at them both, his brows knitting together with concern. Isabella, however, remained calm. "As you wish, senor." Julian turned sharply, heading back into the house without waiting for her to follow. Yet, as he stepped inside, he cast a glance over his shoulder. Leonardo leaned toward Isabella, whispering something. She responded quietly, her expression unreadable, and the boy let out a small, conspiratorial smile. A chill ran down Julian's spine. There was something more to this, something he wasn't seeing, and he was determined to uncover it. Julian sat in his office, fingers steepled beneath his chin as he stared at his computer screen. The information before him was both ordinary and unsettling. Isabella Ruiz, 29 years old, hired as a cook in his estate 6 months ago. No criminal record. No troubling history. Nothing that stood out. She was, by all appearances, exactly what she seemed to be, a house employee who did her job and stayed out of trouble. And yet, Julian couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more, something hidden beneath the surface. His instincts had never failed him before. In business, he had built an empire on knowing when something wasn't as it appeared. And now, those same instincts screamed that Isabella was not just a cook. He typed her name into a broader search, adding a keyword that had been nagging at the back of his mind ever since he saw her dance. Isabella Ruiz. Ballerina. At first, nothing came up. Then, buried beneath articles and irrelevant results, he found it, a news article from 7 years ago. Julian leaned forward, eyes scanning the headline. Young ballet prodigy disappears from the stage without explanation. His pulse quickened. He clicked the link, and as the page loaded, a photo of a much younger Isabella appeared on the screen. She was dressed in a pristine white ballet costume, standing on a grand stage, arms lifted in perfect form. Her expression was serene, confident. Nothing like the reserved cook who worked in his kitchen. The article spoke of a rising star in the ballet world, a dancer with an unmatched gift. She had performed in prestigious theaters, had been on the brink of an international career. Then, suddenly, without any scandal or public incident, she vanished from the spotlight. No interviews. No explanations. Just gone. Julian sat back in his chair, exhaling sharply. Why would someone with that kind of talent abandon their future? And how did she end up here, cooking in his house? The questions piled up, and he knew he wouldn't get answers just by staring at a screen. He needed to hear the truth from her. Standing abruptly, he strode out of his office and made his way to the kitchen. Isabella was there, as expected, methodically cleaning the countertops. She glanced up as he entered, her expression neutral but guarded. "Señor Lombardi," she greeted, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "Is there something you need?" Julian didn't waste time. He pulled out his phone and placed it on the counter, the article about her displayed on the screen. Care to explain this? For the first time since he had met her, he saw genuine surprise flicker across her face. It was brief, but it was there. She didn't immediately respond. Instead, she looked at the screen, then back at him. "You've been searching for me." Her voice was calm, but there was something beneath it, something careful. Julian folded his arms. "I don't like mysteries in my home." Isabella exhaled slowly and placed the dish towel down. For a moment, he thought she might refuse to answer. Then, after a long pause, she spoke. "I suppose I should have expected this," she said quietly. "You're not the type of man to let things go unanswered." Julian didn't respond. He only waited. She looked at the article again, her fingers brushing against the edge of the counter. "I was a dancer," she admitted. "A long time ago." "You were more than just a dancer," Julian corrected. "You were a star." A bitter smile touched her lips. "A star that burned out before it could shine." Julian studied her carefully. "Why did you leave?" She hesitated. He could see the conflict in her eyes, the way she weighed whether to tell him the truth. "Finally," she sighed. "Because I lost everything." Her voice was quieter now, more vulnerable than he had ever heard it before. He didn't push, just waited for her to continue. "When I was 22, dance was my entire world. It was all I knew, all I cared about," she said. "I trained endlessly, pushing myself beyond limits because I believed I was meant for something greater." She paused, then added, "And I wasn't alone." Julian frowned. "Who?" "My fiancé," she said, her voice almost a whisper. "Adrian. He was a dancer too. We had trained together since we were children. We were supposed to take on the world together. We were offered an international tour, a dream we had worked for our entire lives." Something in her tone made Julian's stomach tighten. He already knew where this was going. "The day before our biggest performance, Adrian was hit by a car," she continued, her eyes unfocused, lost in the memory. "He died instantly." Adrian was gone, and with him, so was everything Isabella had built her life around. She tried to push through the grief, to dance again, to find meaning in movement, but every step felt hollow, every turn a painful reminder of what she had lost. The stage, once her sanctuary, became unbearable. The applause that had once lifted her spirit now felt like a cruel echo of what could have been. She had spent years shaping her life around a dream that had vanished in an instant, and without it, she was lost. So she walked away. Julian listened in silence, watching the way her fingers trembled ever so slightly as she spoke. He had expected a story of scandal, of failure, of something that would justify her disappearance from the world she had once ruled. But instead, he found himself faced with something far more human: grief. The kind of grief that reshapes a person, that buries them beneath its weight and forces them to become something else just to survive. He had known loss too. The kind that left a permanent mark. The kind that made the world a colder, less forgiving place. And now, looking at Isabella, he recognized the same thing in her that he had seen in himself all these years, a person trying to exist despite the pain. For a moment, he didn't know what to say. He had come here seeking answers, and now that he had them, they felt heavier than he had anticipated. Finally, he exhaled and leaned against the counter. "And now you teach my son." Isabella met his gaze, her expression unreadable. "I never planned to," she admitted. "I never wanted to be near dance again. But when Leonardo asked me, something about the way he looked at me, I couldn't say no." Julian thought of his son, of how closed off he had been for years, how laughter had become a rare thing in their house. And yet, Isabella had brought it back. She had given him something Julian hadn't been able to, a reason to feel again. He ran a hand over his face, trying to piece together his thoughts. "You realize that if you keep this up, you can't stay invisible forever." Isabella smiled faintly. "I never intended to be invisible. I just needed to be someone else for a while." Julian studied her, his mind shifting through possibilities. He wasn't a sentimental man. He didn't believe in fate or second chances. But he did believe in recognizing value where it existed, and there was no denying that Isabella had brought something into his home that was sorely needed. If Leonardo is serious about this, he needs proper training. More than just practice in the garden. She raised an eyebrow. "And you're asking me to do it?" "I'm saying if you're going to be involved in his life, you might as well do it right." Isabella hesitated, as if weighing the offer carefully. Julian could see the war in her eyes, the part of her that wanted to stay away from the world of dance and the part that had never really left it. But in the end, she sighed and nodded. "All right, but if we do this, it's on my terms. He learns the right way, not just for fun." Julian smirked. "I wouldn't expect anything less." Over the next few weeks, their home changed. What was once a place of rigid routine and quiet formality became something else entirely. Mornings were no longer just for business calls and carefully structured schedules. They were for warm-ups in the garden, for laughter and music filling the air. Leonardo's lessons began early, with Isabella guiding him through the basics, correcting his form, pushing him further than he thought he could go. Julian observed from the background at first, watching with skepticism, waiting for the novelty to wear off. But it never did. Instead, he found himself drawn to the sessions, lingering by the windows or standing in the shadows of the training room, watching as his son transformed. Leonardo, who had once been hesitant, uncertain, now moved with growing confidence. He still stumbled, still made mistakes, but instead of frustration, he pushed forward, driven by something deeper than just learning steps. And Isabella, she was different when she danced. The quiet, reserved woman who moved about the kitchen with careful precision became someone else entirely when she was in her element. There was a grace to her, a fluidity that spoke of years spent shaping her body into something capable of telling stories without words. Julian couldn't help but be fascinated by it, by her. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Julian found himself alone with Isabella in the training room. Leonardo had gone to bed, exhausted from a long day of practice, and the house had settled into its usual stillness. Isabella was stretching, her body moving through the motions with a familiarity that spoke of muscle memory rather than conscious effort. "You still love it," Julian said, leaning against the doorway. She glanced at him, amusement flickering in her eyes. What makes you say that? The way you move. It's not just something you used to do. It's still a part of you. She exhaled, rolling her shoulders. Some things never really leave you, no matter how much you try. Julian watched her for a moment before pushing off the doorframe. Then why are you still running from it? Isabella turned to him fully now, her expression unreadable. I'm not running. I just chose a different path. One that put you in my kitchen instead of on a stage. She smiled wryly. Are you questioning my career choices, Senor Lombardi? He smirked but didn't respond. Instead, he took a step closer, studying her carefully. If Leonardo keeps improving, he'll need more than just lessons here. He'll need exposure. Competitions. Isabella nodded. I know. And you? What will you do then? For the first time, uncertainty crossed her features. I don't know, she admitted. I never planned to go back. But you will. It wasn't a question. She held his gaze, and for a moment, Julian thought she might argue. But instead, she sighed and looked away. Maybe? Julian nodded, satisfied with that answer for now. Then let's make sure Leonardo is ready. Weeks turned into months, and soon, the competition season arrived. Leonardo's first official tournament loomed on the horizon, and the house buzzed with anticipation. The boy trained harder than ever, his determination sharpening into something tangible. Julian had never seen his son so focused, so alive. It was a strange thing, watching him transform before his eyes, becoming someone stronger, more confident. On the day of the tournament, as they stood backstage, Julian saw the nerves flickering in Leonardo's eyes. He placed a hand on his son's shoulder. No matter what happens out there, I'm proud of you. Leonardo nodded, taking a deep breath. Isabella gave him a reassuring smile. Just dance. And so he did. The music started, and Leonardo moved across the stage with a grace that stunned even Julian. He was no longer just a boy learning to dance. He was a dancer. Every step, every motion spoke of passion, of dedication, of something that could not be faked. When the performance ended, Julian was on his feet before he even realized it, clapping louder than anyone else. He didn't care about the final score. He didn't care about trophies. In that moment, he knew what mattered. Later that night, as they drove home, Leonardo held his participation medal in his hands, turning it over thoughtfully. Next time, he said softly, I want to win. Julian smiled. Then we'll make sure you do. And as he glanced at Isabella, he realized something else. They weren't just shaping Leonardo's future. They were all finding something they had lost along the way. And maybe, just maybe, they were all exactly where they needed to be. In the weeks that followed the competition, Leonardo's passion only grew stronger. He trained with an intensity that even Isabella hadn't expected, pushing himself beyond his limits, determined to turn his dreams into reality. Julian watched from the sidelines, a silent witness to the transformation of his son. The shy, reserved boy who had once hidden in the shadows of his father's world was now stepping into his own light. Every morning, before the sun had even fully risen, Leonardo was already practicing. Isabella pushed him harder than ever, her guidance strict but never unkind. She corrected his posture, refined his movements, and instilled in him the discipline that had once been the foundation of her own career. Julian had insisted that if they were going to pursue this, they had to do it properly, no half measures. And Isabella had agreed. But something was changing between them. It wasn't just about Leonardo anymore. It was the way Julian found himself drawn to Isabella, the way he lingered in the training room long after Leonardo had gone to bed, watching her as she moved through routines she claimed to have left behind. There was something captivating about her, something he couldn't quite put into words. One evening, as they sat in the dimly lit training room, Isabella stretched silently, lost in thought. Julian leaned against the mirrored wall, arms crossed. Why don't you compete? He asked suddenly. She glanced at him, surprised. What? You train like someone who never stopped. You still have it in you. She shook her head, a soft, humorless chuckle escaping her lips. That part of my life is over. Why? Because of Adrian? The name hung in the air between them. Isabella stiffened slightly, but she didn't look away. Because I don't need to prove anything to anyone anymore. Julian studied her, his expression unreadable. Maybe not. But have you ever thought that dance isn't something you do just to prove something? Maybe it's just who you are. Isabella exhaled, rubbing her temples. Julian, I teach your son because he reminds me of what it was like to love this. But competing? That's different. Why? Because it means putting yourself back out there. She was silent for a long moment before finally whispering, because if I fail this time, I won't have anything left to fall back on. Julian understood that kind of fear. He had built his empire on control, on never letting emotions dictate his decisions. But this wasn't business. This was something deeper, something that scared him in ways he didn't want to admit. You won't fail, he said simply. Isabella looked at him, and for the first time, Julian saw something raw in her eyes, something unguarded. She wanted to believe him. She just didn't know how. The moment passed, and she shook her head. Right now, my focus is on Leonardo. That's what matters. Julian nodded, but the thought lingered in his mind long after she had left the room. As the next competition approached, Leonardo's training intensified. Julian found himself more invested than he had ever expected, clearing his schedule to attend practices, ensuring his son had the best trainers, the best resources. He was never a man to do things halfway, and this was no exception. One afternoon, as Julian arrived home early from work, he found Leonardo sitting in the study, watching old ballet performances on his tablet. Julian stepped closer, recognizing the performance instantly. It was Isabella. The footage was grainy, but there she was, Isabella Ruiz, the rising star of the ballet world. She moved with an effortless grace, her every movement precise, every turn flawless. Julian had seen her dance before, but never like this. This wasn't just talent. This was something extraordinary. Leonardo looked up at him. She was incredible, wasn't she? Julian nodded, unable to take his eyes off the screen. Yes, she was. Leonardo hesitated before speaking again. Do you think she'll ever dance like that again? Julian didn't answer right away. He had seen the way Isabella still moved when she thought no one was watching, the way she still carried herself with the posture of a dancer. I think some things never really leave us, he said finally. Leonardo nodded, thoughtful. I hope she does. Julian watched his son, a strange feeling settling in his chest. He wasn't the only one who wanted that. The competition day arrived, and the energy backstage was electric. Dancers moved in carefully rehearsed warm-ups, instructors gave last-minute encouragements, and the tension in the air was palpable. Leonardo sat on the bench, stretching his legs, his fingers tapping against his knee. Isabella knelt beside him, adjusting his shoes. Are you ready? She asked softly. Leonardo took a deep breath and nodded. Yes. Julian stood a few feet away, watching the exchange. Isabella had given his son something invaluable, belief in himself. And that was something Julian could never repay. The announcer's voice echoed through the venue. Next, we welcome Leonardo Lombardi to the stage. Leonardo stood, his eyes locking onto Julian's. Julian gave a single nod. Go. As Leonardo stepped onto the stage, Julian felt something tighten in his chest. This was it. The music began, and Leonardo moved. This time, there was no hesitation, no uncertainty. His steps were strong, his movements fluid. He wasn't just performing, he was telling a story. The audience was silent, captivated. And when the final note played, when he landed his final turn with perfect precision, the crowd erupted into applause. Julian was on his feet before he realized it, his hands clapping, a rare smile breaking across his face. When the winners were announced, Julian didn't care about the results. Leonardo had already won in his eyes. But when the announcer called his name for first place, Julian felt something he hadn't in a long time, pride, not just in his son, but in the journey that had brought them here. After the competition, as they exited the venue, Leonardo held his trophy with wide-eyed amazement. I did it, he whispered. Julian placed a hand on his shoulder. Yes, you did. Isabella smiled softly beside them. And this is only the beginning. Julian glanced at her, and in that moment, he realized something else. This wasn't just about Leonardo anymore. Somewhere along the way, they had all found something they hadn't even known they were looking for. And maybe, just maybe, they were exactly where they were meant to be. The days that followed the competition felt different. The house, once filled with quiet restraint, now carried an energy that had never been there before. Leonardo was no longer the same boy who had lived in his father's shadow. He was a competitor now, a dancer with ambition, and Julian had never seen him more alive. Isabella, too, had changed. She still moved through the kitchen with the same quiet efficiency, still oversaw Leonardo's training with the same strict precision. But there was something else now, a shift in the way she carried herself. Julian noticed it in the way she stretched when she thought no one was looking, the way her fingers traced the edge of the piano when music played, as if remembering something distant yet familiar. One evening, long after Leonardo had gone to bed, Julian found her standing alone in the training room. She was barefoot, dressed in a simple tank top and leggings, staring at her reflection in the mirror. "You miss it, don't you?" Julian's voice broke the silence. Isabella startled slightly but didn't turn. "Miss what?" He stepped further into the room, his eyes locked onto hers in the mirror. "Dancing for yourself. Not for teaching, not for someone else. Just for you." She let out a soft breath, looking down at her hands. "Sometimes," she admitted. Julian leaned against the bar, crossing his arms. "Then why don't you?" She hesitated, as if the answer was too complicated to put into words. "Because once I start again, I don't know if I'll be able to stop." "And what's wrong with that?" Isabella turned to face him, searching his expression for something. "You say that like it's simple." "Maybe it is," he said. "Or maybe you're just afraid of what it means." She let out a quiet laugh, shaking her head. "You always think you have people figured out, don't you?" Julian smirked. "It's what I do." She studied him for a long moment before stepping closer. "And what about you, Julian? Do you ever stop long enough to ask yourself what you want?" The question caught him off guard. He had spent his life focused on his business, on his empire, on ensuring that everything ran exactly as it should. But what did he want? For years, the answer had always been control. But now, standing here with her, he wasn't so sure. "You think too much," Isabella murmured, a small smile playing on her lips. "Sometimes you just have to let go." Before he could respond, she turned toward the stereo, pressing play. A soft melody filled the room. "Show me, then," Julian said, his voice quieter now. Isabella hesitated for only a second before stepping into the music. And just like that, she became something else. Her movements were effortless, each step flowing into the next like water. She wasn't just performing, she was lost in it, her body moving with the kind of freedom that came from years of discipline, years of knowing exactly who she was when she danced. Julian couldn't look away. This was Isabella Ruiz, the dancer the world had lost. And for the first time, he understood why she had run from it. Because when she danced, she belonged to something bigger than herself. And maybe that terrified her. When the song ended, she stood there, breathing heavily, her eyes locked onto his. Neither of them spoke. Then, finally, Julian stepped forward. "You should compete again." Isabella exhaled sharply, shaking her head. "Julian." "I'm serious," he interrupted. "You're wasting this." She laughed softly, but there was something sad in it. "It's not that simple. Nothing worth having ever is." She looked at him then, really looked at him, and Julian felt something shift in the air between them. "I don't know if I can," she admitted. Julian smirked. "Then let's find out." And just like that, everything changed. The decision wasn't made overnight. Isabella resisted at first, insisting that she was done with that part of her life, that stepping back onto a stage wasn't something she needed anymore. But Julian saw through her. He saw the way her fingers twitched when she heard music, the way her body still carried the instinct of a dancer even when she was simply moving through the house. And Leonardo saw it too. One evening, as they sat at the dining table, Leonardo placed his fork down and looked directly at Isabella. "Why won't you dance again?" Isabella paused, caught off guard. "I do dance." "No, I mean really dance," Leonardo pressed. "For you." She hesitated, searching for an answer. Julian remained silent, watching her carefully. "It's complicated," she finally said. Leonardo frowned. "I don't think it is. You love it. And you always tell me that if you love something, you shouldn't run from it." Julian smirked at his son's words. "Sounds like he's been listening to you." Isabella exhaled, rubbing her forehead. I wouldn't even know where to start." "You start the same way I did," Leonardo said. "One step at a time." Isabella looked between the two of them, realization dawning on her. It wasn't just about her anymore. She had spent so long avoiding dance because it reminded her of everything she had lost. But now, she was beginning to see something else, what it could still give her. She sighed, shaking her head. "You two are impossible." Julian grinned. "So that's a yes?" She groaned, but there was a small smile on her lips. "Fine. I'll think about it." Leonardo beamed. Julian simply leaned back, satisfied. It wasn't a full victory. Not yet. But it was a start. The first time Isabella truly danced again was unplanned. It was late, and the house was quiet. Julian had been working in his office when he heard the faint sound of music coming from the training room. Curious, he followed the sound, stopping just outside the doorway. And there she was. Isabella moved across the floor, her body lost in the rhythm, her eyes closed as if she were somewhere else entirely. There was no hesitation now, no fear. Only movement, only the dance. Julian watched, mesmerized. When she finally stopped, she turned and saw him standing there. "You're staring," she said, catching her breath. Julian stepped forward. "You're worth staring at." A flicker of something passed through her expression, but she quickly masked it. "I was just testing myself." Julian studied her carefully. "And?" She exhaled. "And I think I might not be as finished as I thought." A slow smirk pulled at his lips. "Good." She raised an eyebrow. "You really want me to do this, don't you?" Julian nodded. "Not just for you. For him. For Leonardo." Isabella glanced toward the door, as if picturing the boy asleep in his room. "He looks up to me." Julian's voice softened. "That's because he sees what I see. Someone who was meant for more." Isabella held his gaze for a long moment. Then, finally, she nodded. "All right," she whispered. "Let's see what I can still do." Training began just as it had for Leonardo. Early mornings, long hours, grueling routines. But this time, the stakes were higher. Isabella wasn't just teaching now, she was preparing herself for a return to a world that had once belonged to her. And Julian was there for every step of it. He had never been a part of this world before. He understood business, power, control. But dance was different. It was something raw, something unpredictable. And yet, as he watched Isabella push herself, he realized something: this was where she was strongest. She had been meant for this. One evening, as she finished an exhausting session, Julian handed her a towel. "You're ready." Isabella shook her head, still breathing heavily. "Not yet." "Yes, you are," Julian insisted. "You just don't believe it yet." She sighed, looking at him. "And you do." Julian smirked. "I wouldn't bet against you." She chuckled softly, shaking her head. "You always have to be so confident, don't you? It's one of my better qualities." She rolled her eyes, but couldn't hide the small smile on her lips. And just like that, everything was set into motion. The night of Isabella's first performance in years arrived faster than she had anticipated. The theater was packed, the audience buzzing with anticipation. Isabella stood backstage, adjusting the straps on her costume, her hands trembling slightly. Julian stepped up beside her. "Nervous?" She exhaled. Terrified. He placed a hand on her shoulder, grounding her. "Good. That means it matters." She turned to look at him. "Why are you here, Julian?" He held her gaze. "Because I told you, you're not doing this alone." She studied him for a moment before nodding. Then, as the announcer called her name, she took a deep breath and stepped onto the stage. And the moment she began to dance, everything else disappeared. She was home. Julian sat in the front row, watching as she reclaimed what had once been hers. And in that moment, he knew she wasn't just meant for this. She was born for it. The audience was silent, captivated by the way Isabella moved across the stage. Every step, every motion was precise, filled with a raw emotion that only she could express. It was as if no time had passed, as if she had never left this world at all. Julian watched, unable to look away. This wasn't just dance. It was a story, a confession, a part of her soul laid bare for the world to see. And for the first time in years, she wasn't running from it. She was embracing it. The final note of the music played, and she landed her last movement flawlessly. A moment of stillness followed, the kind that held everything in it, the weight of her past, the promise of her future. Then the applause erupted. It started as a murmur, then built into a thunderous ovation. The entire theater was on its feet. Julian could see it in her face, the overwhelming emotion, the disbelief, the realization that she had just done the impossible. She had come back. Backstage, Isabella barely had time to catch her breath before Leonardo ran up to her, eyes shining with excitement. "That was amazing," he said, his voice filled with awe. "I knew you could do it." She laughed, pulling him into a hug. "Thank you, Leonardo." Julian approached next, his expression unreadable, but there was something in his eyes that hadn't been there before. Pride. Admiration. Something deeper. "You did it," he said simply. She met his gaze, her breath still unsteady. "I did." Julian studied her for a moment before smirking. "So, what's next?" She exhaled, shaking her head. "I don't know. But for the first time in a long time, I think I'm ready to find out." He nodded, satisfied with that answer. As they stepped out into the night, the echoes of applause still ringing in her ears, Isabella realized something. This wasn't just a comeback. This was a beginning. And she wasn't doing it alone. In the days that followed, everything felt different. The weight that had been pressing down on Isabella for years had finally begun to lift. She had stepped back onto the stage not as the broken girl who had run from her past, but as the woman who was ready to reclaim it. And the world had noticed. The performance had made headlines, the return of Isabella Ruiz, a dancer's redemption, from the shadows to the spotlight. Invitations poured in. Prestigious ballet companies, choreographers, and artistic directors who had once assumed she had disappeared forever were suddenly reaching out, eager to know if this was just a fleeting moment or the start of something more. Julian watched it all unfold with a quiet satisfaction. He had known this would happen. He had seen it before in business. Talent never stays buried for long. And Isabella? She wasn't just talented. She was extraordinary. But with success came choices. One afternoon, Isabella sat at the dining table, staring at an email from a world-renowned ballet company offering her a spot in their next season. Julian walked in, catching the look on her face. "Let me guess," he said, sitting across from her. "Another offer?" She sighed, rubbing her temples. "Yes. And this one, it's big." Julian leaned forward, glancing at the screen. "The Royal Ballet?" He let out a low whistle. "That's not just big, Isabella. That's the top." She exhaled. "I know. So, what's the problem?" She hesitated before answering. "Leonardo. His training. The life I've built here. If I take this, everything changes." Julian studied her carefully. "And if you don't?" Isabella looked down. "Then I might regret it forever." The room was silent for a moment. Then, Julian spoke. "You don't have to choose between them, Isabella. You taught Leonardo to fight for what he loves. Now it's your turn." She looked up at him. "And what if I fail?" Julian smirked. "Then you'll get back up. Just like you taught him to." Isabella let out a breath, a small smile tugging at her lips. "You make it sound so easy." "It's not," he admitted. "But the best things never are." She nodded slowly, the weight of the decision still heavy on her shoulders, but suddenly it didn't feel impossible. Because for the first time in years, she wasn't making the choice alone. That evening, Isabella found Leonardo in the training room, practicing his footwork in front of the mirrors. He was focused, determined, but when he saw her standing in the doorway, he paused. "Hey," he said, wiping his brow. "Is something wrong?" She stepped inside, sitting on the bench. "I need to talk to you about something." Leonardo frowned and walked over, sensing the seriousness in her tone. "Okay." She took a deep breath. "I got an offer. A big one. A chance to dance professionally again." His eyes widened. "That's amazing." She smiled, but there was hesitation in her expression. "It means leaving for a while. It means things will be different." Leonardo was quiet for a moment, then he nodded. "You should do it." She blinked. "You think so?" He sat beside her, his small hands gripping his knee. "You always tell me that dance is about feeling. About doing what makes you happy. And when you danced that night, I've never seen you happier." A lump formed in her throat. "Leonardo." He smiled. "You gave me dance. Now I want you to have it too." Isabella closed her eyes for a brief moment, overwhelmed by the depth of his words. When she opened them, she reached over and pulled him into a tight embrace. "You are the best student I've ever had," she whispered. He grinned. "I know." She laughed, shaking her head. "And the most humble." Leonardo pulled back, his expression serious again. "You'll come back, right?" She ruffled his hair. "Of course. I'm not going anywhere forever." Satisfied, Leonardo nodded. "Then go. Show them what you can do." Isabella smiled, her heart full. "I will." Julian stood by the car as Isabella finished packing her bags. He had watched the entire exchange between her and Leonardo, and for the first time, he saw true peace in her eyes. She turned to face him, adjusting the strap on her shoulder. "So, this is it. For now," he said. She tilted her head, studying him. "You never doubted this would happen, did you?" Julian smirked. "No. I knew you were meant for more than a kitchen." She laughed, shaking her head. "You really are impossible, Julian Lombardi. And you love it." She opened her mouth to argue, but stopped. Instead, she smiled. "Take care of Leonardo." "You don't have to ask," he said, his voice softer now. For a moment, there was only silence between them. Then, Isabella took a step closer, placing a hand on his chest. "Thank you," she whispered. Julian didn't respond with words. Instead, he reached up, his fingers brushing against her cheek before pulling her into a deep, lingering kiss. When they finally pulled away, Isabella smiled. "I'll see you soon." Julian nodded. "I'll be waiting." She turned and got into the car. As it pulled away, Julian stood there, watching until she was out of sight. And for the first time in years, he felt something unfamiliar. Hope. Because this wasn't the end. Weeks passed and life moved forward. Isabella's departure left a noticeable absence in the Lombardi estate, but in many ways, her presence still lingered. The training room wasn't empty. The music still played. Leonardo continued to practice with the same determination, and Julian found himself watching every performance of hers that he could find online. She had stepped back onto the world stage, and she was making waves. The return of Isabella Ruiz, a ballerina reborn. The lost prodigy dances again. A comeback years in the making. Every article, every review, praised her. Critics marveled at how she had vanished from the dance world only to return stronger than ever, as if time had never touched her. The videos of her performances went viral, millions of views, thousands of comments. She wasn't just back. She was taking the world by storm. And Julian watched all of it unfold from a distance. He told himself he was keeping track of her career because of Leonardo, that he needed to stay updated for his son's sake. But deep down, he knew better. Late one evening, as Julian sat in his office, reviewing yet another performance video, a knock sounded at the door. Leonardo peeked in, his expression hesitant. "Can I talk to you?" Julian set his phone down. Of course. What's on your mind? Leonardo stepped inside, shifting his weight. It's about Isabella. Julian leaned back. What about her? The boy hesitated, then took a deep breath. I think you miss her. Julian's lips twitched. Do you now? Leonardo nodded. You watch her dance all the time. You don't think I notice, but I do. Julian exhaled, rubbing his temples. And what exactly are you suggesting? Leonardo grinned. That you do something about it. Julian chuckled, shaking his head. You think it's that simple? It was for me, Leonardo said. When I wanted to dance, I asked her for help. When she wanted to dance again, we helped her. So why can't you just go to her? Julian was silent for a moment. His son made it sound so easy. But Isabella had a new life now, a career she had worked so hard to reclaim. Who was he to step in the middle of that? Leonardo's voice softened. You always tell me to fight for what I love. Why aren't you fighting for her? The words hit him harder than he expected. Leonardo was right. Julian had spent years building his empire, controlling everything in his life, ensuring nothing ever slipped through his fingers. But this was something he couldn't calculate. He had never been one to hesitate. And he wasn't about to start now. The next morning, Julian made a decision. After a few calls, he cleared his schedule. He didn't tell anyone where he was going, not even Leonardo. He simply packed a bag, booked a flight, and left. The destination? London. Isabella had joined the Royal Ballet for a limited engagement, and tonight, she was performing at the Royal Opera House. It was one of the most prestigious venues in the world, and she was the star of the show. Julian arrived at the theater just before the performance started. He didn't go backstage. He didn't call her. He simply found his seat near the front, sat down, and waited. When the lights dimmed and the curtain rose, he saw her. And for the first time in his life, Julian Lombardi felt utterly powerless. Isabella commanded the stage with every step, every motion. The world around her disappeared. The music, the lights, the audience, it all faded away. She was breathtaking. She was home. And Julian knew in that moment, he wasn't here just to watch her. He was here to bring her back. The performance ended with thunderous applause. Isabella took her bows, but as she lifted her head, something caught her eye. Someone. Her breath hitched. Julian. He was there, standing in the audience, watching her with that same intense gaze she had come to know so well. The world around her blurred. The crowd, the noise, the flashing lights, it all faded. He had come for her. Backstage, Isabella paced her dressing room, still buzzing with adrenaline. There was a knock at the door. She turned just as Julian stepped inside. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then, finally, she broke the silence. What are you doing here? Julian smirked. I think you already know. Isabella exhaled, shaking her head. Julian. He stepped closer. Tell me to leave, and I will. But if there's even a small part of you that wants me to stay, say it. She met his gaze, her heart pounding. For so long, she had convinced herself that dance was the only thing she needed. That reclaiming her career was the final piece of the puzzle. But looking at him now, she realized something. He had been a part of this journey all along. And she didn't want to do it without him. She swallowed hard, then whispered, Stay. Julian's smirk softened. I thought you'd never ask. And then, just like before, he closed the distance between them. But this time, when he kissed her, there was no hesitation. Because this time, there was no more running. Weeks later, Isabella made her choice. She would continue dancing, but she wasn't staying in London forever. She had a home now, a real home. A place where she had built something with people who mattered. She returned to Italy, where Julian and Leonardo were waiting. She returned not just as a dancer, but as something more. As someone who had finally found her way back. And as she stepped into the Lombardi estate, looking at the two people who had changed her life forever, she smiled. Because this? Life at the Lombardi estate was different now. Isabella wasn't just a guest, nor was she merely an instructor for Leonardo. She was part of something, part of a family she never thought she would have again. Her return hadn't been a dramatic affair. There had been no grand speeches, no extravagant declarations. Julian had simply picked her up from the airport himself, no chauffeur, no staff. Just him. He had loaded her bags into the car while she had stood there, still soaking in the reality that she had chosen this, that she had chosen them. On the drive back, neither of them had spoken much. But the silence hadn't been uncomfortable. It had been filled with something deeper, understanding. And now, weeks later, she still found herself adjusting to this new reality. She and Julian had fallen into an easy rhythm. He still had his empire to run, still carried himself with that same controlled confidence that had first irritated her. But now, she could see what lay beneath it, the man who had learned to let go, to loosen his grip on the things he thought he needed to control. With Leonardo, it was effortless. Their bond had never changed, only grown stronger. He trained harder than ever, and now, with Isabella fully present, his progress was remarkable. One evening, as she sat on the balcony overlooking the gardens, Julian joined her, 2 glasses of wine in hand. He handed her one before taking a seat beside her. "You seem deep in thought," he noted, watching her. She smirked, taking a sip. "You always say that." "Because it's always true." She chuckled softly, shaking her head. "It still feels strange, you know. Being back here. Having this." Julian studied her for a moment before asking, "Do you regret it?" She turned to him, meeting his gaze. "Not for a second." His smirk softened into something more sincere. "Good." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching as the sun dipped below the horizon. The world was quiet, peaceful. It was a kind of peace Isabella hadn't realized she was capable of having. Then Julian spoke again, his voice quieter now. "So what comes next?" She exhaled, setting her glass down. "I don't know." He tilted his head slightly. "Liar." She laughed, shaking her head. "All right, fine. I do know." Julian raised an eyebrow, waiting. She turned to fully face him. "I want to open a studio." That got his attention. "A studio?" "A place where kids like Leonardo, kids who don't have the opportunity, the access, can learn. Where they don't have to worry about being good enough or rich enough to get a chance." Julian considered this for a moment. "You'd be teaching full-time?" She nodded. "Not just teaching. Mentoring. Creating something bigger than just dance steps." He smirked. "And here I thought you were done changing lives." She rolled her eyes. "Says the man who flew across the world for me." Julian raised his glass in a silent toast. "Touché." She chuckled before leaning back against the chair. "So, what do you think?" He was quiet for a moment, then said, "I think it's brilliant." She blinked. "You do?" He nodded. "And I think I might know someone who can help fund it." She narrowed her eyes. "Let me guess. A powerful businessman with control issues." Julian smirked. "I prefer the term strategic investor." Isabella laughed, shaking her head. "I should have known." He reached over, taking her hand. "Isabella, if this is what you want, we make it happen. No half measures." She looked at him, the warmth in his gaze unmistakable. She had spent so much of her life fighting for control, for survival. But now, for the first time, she wasn't fighting alone. She squeezed his hand. "Then let's do it." Julian smiled, and just like that, a new chapter began. Months later, the studio was real. It wasn't just an idea anymore. It had a name, a space, students eager to learn. Isabella had poured everything into it, her experience, her passion, her heart. And the results spoke for themselves. Leonardo was her first student, but he wasn't the last. The studio quickly filled with children from all backgrounds, each of them carrying their own dreams, their own reasons for wanting to dance. Some wanted to compete. Some simply wanted to move. And Isabella gave them all the same thing, a place where they belonged. Julian, true to his word, had been involved every step of the way. He had handled the business side of things, ensured that funding was never an issue, that Isabella had everything she needed. But more than that, he had supported her. One evening, as Isabella locked up the studio after a long day, Julian leaned against the doorway, watching her. She smiled at him. "You're here late." He shrugged. "I like watching you work." She walked over, looping her arms around his neck. "You're a terrible businessman. This place doesn't make you any money." He smirked. "Not everything is about money." She raised an eyebrow. "You sure about that?" He leaned in, his voice low. "I'm sure about you." Isabella's breath caught. No matter how many times he said things like that, it always had the same effect. She smiled softly. "Good." He kissed her then, slow and deliberate, as if neither of them were in any rush to let go. Because the truth was, they weren't. They had spent years running, building walls, convincing themselves that they were fine on their own. But now? Now, they had something real. And neither of them were ever letting it go. Life at the studio settled into a rhythm, a new kind of dance that Isabella found herself loving more than she ever imagined. Each morning, she arrived early, stretching in the quiet space before the students trickled in, their energy filling the room like sunlight streaming through the windows. Leonardo was there every day, training harder than ever, but now, he wasn't just her student, he was her assistant. He helped younger kids with their footing, showed them the joy in movement, and took pride in their progress. Julian, for all his claims of not getting involved, found himself drawn to the studio more often than not. He would stop by after work, watching from the doorway with that unreadable expression of his. Isabella knew he would never admit it outright, but he was proud of what she had built. One afternoon, as Isabella finished teaching a class, Julian stood leaning against the bar, arms crossed. "You should let me build you a bigger place," he said casually. She raised an eyebrow, wiping sweat from her forehead. "This again? You're already at capacity. There's a wait list. You need more space." She sighed, shaking her head. "Julian, I appreciate the offer, but I don't need a corporate-funded dance empire." He smirked. "I never said corporate." She gave him a look. "Really?" "Because I can already picture the Lombardi Institute of Dance, plastered across the entrance." He chuckled. "Tempting, but no. This is your name, Isabella. Your legacy. I just want to make sure you have everything you need." She softened at that. She knew Julian. When he cared about something, he went all in. And despite his usual detached demeanor, he cared about this. About her. She stepped closer, placing a hand on his chest. "You've already given me more than I could ask for." He covered her hand with his. "Then let me do this one more thing." She studied him for a moment, then sighed in surrender. "Fine. But if I see a single gold-plated sign with your name on it, I'm kicking you out." Julian smirked. Noted. A few months later, the expansion was complete. The studio had doubled in size, with new practice rooms, better flooring, and even a small performance space where students could showcase their progress. Isabella hadn't realized how much she needed this until she saw it finished. The grand opening was small but meaningful. Parents, students, and a few old friends from Isabella's past who had come to support her. Julian, of course, was there, standing at her side like he had always been. As the night wound down, she found him on the balcony, sipping a glass of whiskey, watching the city's skyline. "You did good, Lombardi," she murmured, stepping beside him. He smirked. "I always do." She rolled her eyes, but there was no hiding the warmth in her smile. "Seriously, Julian. Thank you." He turned to her, something softer in his gaze. "You don't have to thank me, Isabella. This was always yours. You just needed to see it." She exhaled, leaning against the railing. "It's crazy, isn't it? How everything changed." Julian chuckled. "If you had told me a year ago that I'd be investing in a dance studio and spending my evenings watching ballet rehearsals, I would have laughed in your face." She grinned. "And yet, here you are." He tilted his head, studying her. "And you? Did you ever think you'd end up here?" She shook her head. "No. I thought I had lost everything. But now I feel like I finally found where I belong." Julian reached for her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. "Good. Because you're not running anymore. And neither am I. She looked at him, her heart full. No, they weren't running anymore. They had found something neither of them had expected: home. And as Julian pulled her into a slow, lingering kiss under the night sky, Isabella knew one thing for certain. The seasons changed, and life settled into a rhythm neither Isabella nor Julian had expected, but one they had come to love. The studio flourished, growing beyond what Isabella had ever dreamed. More students came, drawn not just by the prestige of her name, but by the warmth of the place itself. It was more than a school. It was a home for young dancers who, like Leonardo, had once needed someone to believe in them. Julian remained involved in his own way. He never overstepped, never tried to turn the studio into a business venture. But he was always there, helping with logistics, sitting quietly in the back during rehearsals, watching Isabella teach with a pride he didn't bother to hide anymore. And Leonardo. Leonardo was becoming something special. He had started as a boy who danced for joy. Now he danced for purpose. His movements were sharper, stronger, more refined. He trained relentlessly, and Isabella pushed him because she saw what he could become. Not just a good dancer. A great one. One evening, after an exhausting rehearsal, Leonardo collapsed onto the studio floor, panting. Isabella tossed him a bottle of water, her own face glistening with sweat. "You're getting better," she admitted. Leonardo grinned, taking a sip. "Good enough to win the next competition?" She tilted her head. "Good enough to try." Julian, who had been watching from the doorway, stepped forward. "He'll win." Leonardo smirked. "Someone's confident." Julian ruffled his hair. "Confidence runs in the family." Leonardo groaned, pushing his hand away. "Not the hair, Dad." Isabella laughed, shaking her head. "All right, enough. Go shower before you stink up the place." Leonardo grinned before jogging off, leaving Isabella and Julian alone in the empty studio. Julian leaned against the bar, watching her. "You know he's going to be incredible, right?" Isabella nodded. "I do." Julian studied her for a moment. "And you? What comes next for you?" She exhaled, thinking. "I have everything I want, Julian. I have the studio, Leonardo, and—" She trailed off, looking at him. "You." Something shifted in his expression, something deeper than words. "Good," he murmured, stepping closer. "Because I'm not going anywhere." She smiled. "Neither am I." And as Julian pulled her into a slow, tender kiss, Isabella realized something. The girl who had once lost everything was gone. The woman standing here had built something new. A life, a home, a future, and for the first time in forever, she wasn't afraid. Because this was her happy ending.